Hello, so today we are going to start doing problems from Leetcode JavaScript challenge on Leetcode. So the day number 3, counter 2. The problem says we want to write a function create counter where it should accept an initial integer called init, and it should return an object that has 3 functions. Okay, the one is increment. Well, basically we just increment the current value by 1 and we return it. The other one is decrement, where we reduce the current value by 1 and return it again, or reset, where we reinitialize the value to this initial value and then return it as well, but the counter is shared between all of these, right? So each of them updates it. So for example, we start out with 5, we increment it, so that becomes 6. We reset, so we put it back to 5, and then we decrement, so it's 4. So that's sort of the idea here. Let's implement it. Okay, so let's see how we can tackle this. So the easiest way here is to just create your counter, and then you just create an object that has these functions, right? Because you can see here we assign the objects to this variable here, and then we just call the functions that we need. So that's what we sort of need to return. So we need to create that object first, and that object needs these functions increment, decrement, and reset. So let's just have them ready here: decrement and reset. Okay, we'll define functions for all of these because they are called as functions. So let's just put our templates in. So we would have something like this for this one, and since this is an object, these are just like we separate them by comma, and similarly for decrement and then for reset. Okay, and now one thing to note is we need a counter because each time we'll increment it, decrement it, or reset it. So we need a variable for it. So we'll create here, let's call it count, and let's initialize it to init. Okay, now one thing you notice here is that this is a function, okay, and then these are inner functions that are in the object that the function returns. And so that's where it's one thing to note here is that we don't need to like store this counter because it's in the scope of this function, the outer function, which means the inner functions will have access to it. That's not true if, by the way, if you have a variable x here 1, the outer function won't get access to it, but the reverse is true. So that's just something to know about JavaScript there. So here we should be pretty easy. So we want to just increment it, right? So we can do +1 or we could do ++. We don't need to do the comma like this, but you can add it if you want, but I'll skip it. And we just return the count. Okay. Now this is one way to do it, but another way to do it is actually you don't need, you can just do ++. If you do it this way, then the increment will happen first before we return the value. Okay, so that's one thing we can do here, and the same thing applies to decrementing. We can do the subtract like this, and then return it. Now what about the resetting? Well, we need to set the value to this variable. We said that we have access to it because of the outer function scope closure here, and so we can just assign it like this and then return the new count. So pretty straightforward. We just return the object. Now if we run this, it should pass, and it does. Okay, now I just want to show you a couple of different other ways to solve this. So we actually don't need to define the function or the function variable. There is a shorthand syntax that we can use with row functions like this. So we do, and we can just return like this count, and this will return the latest variable, which is this count, and we will also increment it. And then another way to do, we can apply the same thing here, and this should work as well like this. Okay, and then for this function though, it's a little bit slightly different. We need the arrow function. We could leave it like this, but even easier, we could just do count equal to init, and then it will return this variable count, like and so this should return it. Now let's run it and submit, and this passes as well. Okay, so that's one way to do it. Now if we sort of go back to our previous way of doing this, I just want to show you another way to do this, just so that you are able to read a lot of different styles of code. So we can actually define this function outside and just create a variable for it. So let's call it just increment, right? like this. So we can have our increment function. And then we can do the same thing for our decrement function. So this would be decrement here. And then we can do the same thing for reset. So let's just call it reset here. And this would be just resetting and then returning the count. Okay. And now we can just put these functions here and then put decrement and then put reset. Okay. So especially if you have big functions, this style may be better. And so if we submit, it works. Now, one other thing to note here is that in JavaScript, if you have objects that the key is the same as the name of the variables or the functions, you don't need to actually duplicate it, right? So if you have something, let's say like, let's say even if you had where you are returning a name and you have a variable name, right? So the name is the key and you have a variable name, then you don't actually need to define it. Define both. You could just return name like this. So that's what we can take advantage of here. So we could just remove decrement like this, and now it's a lot easier. So we can just do it like this, and we can do it like this. Okay. So this is also a different way of implementing it. So if I run this and submit, it does pass as well. Okay. Yeah, so I think that covers different approaches. There is another approach where you just can create like a class, just a JavaScript class, and do it that way. That's also valid. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this problem. Please like and subscribe, and see you on the next one. Bye.